Alright, welcome back to the channel, everyone. So, today, as per usual, I'm browsing through Twitter, seeing what's going on, and there's a screenshot from Threads. And I guess Threads is like Instagram's version of Twitter, and I'm like, when it came out, I'm like, I don't need two Twitters, I could care less. So I never got it, but it was screenshotted, and it's Michael Chandler saying 2026, the 24th of January, and he's calling out McGregor. This is probably like the thousandth time he's called him out. And if I'm McGregor, honest to God, man, I would consider getting a restraining order. Because I think this might be the saddest thing since Tony Ferguson and Khabib. And the difference between this and Tony Ferguson and Khabib is that, first of all, there was an actual demand for the fight at the time. I get nowadays, obviously it's a lot different, but Tony can't let it go for whatever reason. Every time he's in an interview, he always calls out Khabib for coaching the tough or whatever. But like I said, there was actual interest in Tony versus Khabib. Not only that, there was a belt on the line. And the reason, in my opinion, that Tony Ferguson can't let it go is because he never truly got the chance to prove whether he was the best in the world or not. And in hindsight, obviously, Tony would have lost 100%. Khabib was levels above Tony. However, in Tony's mind, as much as he fought, Gaethje, he fought Oliveira and all that, the fact that he never got to fight Khabib will haunt him for the rest of his life. I feel like he's just that type of person, and it shows. He always brings it up. Whereas Chandler, you were on tough with McGregor. Cool. So was Uriah Faber. You know what I mean? McGregor doesn't have to fight everyone who's on tough. Look at the recent tough now. You think Chael and DC are fighting? Not a chance. And the thing is, too, you had 3 months to kindle up an interesting storyline with the biggest star the UFC has ever seen and ever will see. And you fumbled the bag. Like, all you did was you spent the whole time kissing his ass, and then the one time you got up at his face, and McGregor's like, oh, these guys went before you in the UFC, yeah? He let a Bellator tick. And then he gets up in his face, and he pushes Chandler, and then Chandler sounds like fucking Toad from Mario. Oh, yeah! And then it pans to Dana White, and Dana White's like, what the fuck's going on here? And that was it. Like I said, the rest of the time you spent kissing his ass. There's no demand for that fight. Not only that, what is he, like 1-4 in his last 5 fights? And obviously he's not fighting cans, and everyone's like, now that Patty beat him, he's like, oh yeah, Patty's not even that good, blah, blah, blah. Still, McGregor generally fights people where if he wins, he can start bragging or he can get to a title shot or whatever, you know what I mean? Whether it's for a belt or Poirier, because if he beat Poirier, he was going to fight the champion. I think it was either Oliveira or Mcgregor at the time. Obviously, because McGregor has that stardom and he can just bypass all these other contenders. Whereas now, you beat Chandler, who's beyond washed, who loses almost every fight he's been in the UFC. He's lost more than he's won. And like I said, there's going to be zero storyline, zero build-up. And the fans, I was reading all in the comments, and people are like, this is just pathetic. This is just sad, man. And it's true. Like, I feel like Chandler really needs to realize where he's at in the UFC. And not only that, it's like, I get Chandler's a company man, but who the fuck are you to deserve a McGregor fight at this point? You know what I'm saying? Like, his only claim to that is the tough season. But still, that didn't do great either, right? So, like I said, you had your chance to make it big, and you failed that. And then you burned 2 years of possibly the remaining prime of his career, and you wasted that, and you still haven't learned your lesson. And that's the thing. If he's seriously thinking about waiting out until 2026 for McGregor, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Because what I feel like they should be doing with Chandler, they should be doing him versus Mauricio Hoofy. Get as much out of Chandler as you still possibly can. And then that's the thing. Let's say McGregor magically comes back. I guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee because the UFC has been doing questionable things lately, but the UFC should only book McGregor for one fight. There's one fight that makes sense. And I know a lot of people are going to argue with me, but still. It should be Nate Diaz. And people are going to be like, oh, well, Nate Diaz, he's not looking good and he's lost a bunch of his fights too. Okay, cool, great. But listen to my response. Nate Diaz has a built-in storyline with McGregor. They're both superstars. Nate Diaz, he can lose 100 fights and his fan base will still not give a shit and still revere him as one of the GOATs. There's always going to be tension between McGregor and Nate Diaz. They can hype up anything. Every time they're in the room together, it's must-see TV. Nate Diaz would rather die than kiss McGregor's ass like Chandler did for the whole fucking season. And not only that, like I said before, they're both in their similar stages of careers where I feel like it's a winnable fight for McGregor. And that's the thing. If Diaz wins, it is what it is. Diaz rides off in the sunset. I think both people should ride off in the sunset. But having Chandler lose, where he's not even half the stars McGregor or Nate Diaz is, and he's lost 4 of his last 5. So if he beats McGregor, that literally destroys McGregor's legacy. Whereas, let's say Nate Diaz beats McGregor, he already beat him in the first time, so it's not as big of a deal, right? And they have to close off their trilogy. It only makes sense. Whereas, like I said, Chandler, he should be focusing on the lower of the top 15 of the lightweight division. Maybe they do him versus Benoit Saint Denis, or maybe they do ideally him versus Mauricio Hufi. Because Mauricio Hufi, he's one of my favorite fighters to watch. He's probably my top 3 favorite fighters. Not only that, he fights like McGregor. So hey, you want to fight McGregor? Go ahead with Mauricio Hufi. And that's the thing. It gives Mauricio Hufi a chance to build back his stardom, and then it gives Chandler a chance to be like, okay, I can still shut down these top 5 or up and coming lightweight killers. And if Michael Chandler miraculously wins, then you can call up, in the top end of the division. Because in my opinion, it's like if Chandler beats Mauricio Hufi, then I feel like he could call out Dan Hooker, because I feel like Dan Hooker, he'd be like, fucking hell, I want to get that one back. And obviously he got knocked out by Chandler, and I feel like Dan Hooker is the type to want to get his get back, because I remember one of his videos with Adesanya, he was they were breaking down an Edson Barbosa fight, and he's like, oh, I fucking hate Edson Barbosa. And he's like, they're like, why? He's like, he kicked my ass, cunt. It's like, fuck, he still hates him to this day. And that fight was ages ago. So I feel like he would definitely still be like motivated to fight Chandler. That's the thing. If I'm Hooker, though, I probably want to look at the top of the division because of what he's done. Like, he's beat Mateusz Gamrot, and I don't think Paddy would ever beat Mateusz Gamrot at this point. So he definitely deserves up in the rankings, but Dan Hooker's a wild man, and he might accept that fight. But Chandler's got to get his, as he says, his bootstraps on and get going, because if he decides to burn another, and I get he's been through a war, so he shouldn't return like soon, but still, if he waits all the way till 2026, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. And I just, like I said, I really don't like Chandler for a multitude of reasons, but his decision making in his fight career is probably number 1. And it's very painful to watch this. Very painful to watch this. And I just, like I said, Nate Diaz, McGregor, that's the only fight that makes sense for them. And then they can ride off in the sunset. And then Chandler, if he still wants to fight, he can fight Mauricio Hufi. Because if I'm Dana White, it's like, yeah, that's the best I got, kid. Because I don't understand how they still revere Chandler as the star. Like, how many fights can you lose to still be relevant in this game? I just don't get it. I really, really, really don't get it. So, yeah, like and subscribe, and see you guys on the next one.